Hello, and welcome to the C3 Method podcast with your host, Robert Polenic. Our goal is to educate you on everything health and fitness related with a clear, concise, and customized approach. We want you to know what you need to know and how to apply it in a way that fits you best. Okay, today's podcast number 2306. We're going to talk about calorie consistency versus an average. So we want to look at our calories as being consistent more than we would think of our calories in an average setting. So the example here is I have a client who was struggling to lose weight. They had a calorie range that they were supposed to stay within. The range is actually an 800 calorie range. We'll give an example of 2,000 to 2,800 calories. They are then told to eat lower in that range if they want to push for more fat loss. Eat higher in the range if their energy is a little low, recovery's low, maybe they just are hungrier that day. They can eat a little bit higher in the range. Anywhere in the range is going to make them progress. So even at 2,800 calories, it is below their maintenance calories, but it gives us a nice structured range to where we're not eating so low that we're actually eating too significantly under their BMR, which is their basal metabolic rate. If you go under the BMR, which is just how many calories our body needs to stay alive, if we go too far under that, the body starts to down-regulate its metabolism, its caloric usage. So it'll use less calories to repair muscle tissue, use less calories to maybe grow your hair, your skin, your nails, anything that's a non-essential process, meaning if it slows it down a little bit, you're not going to die. It will do that. So if we eat too low under the BMR and we do that too often, the body will downregulate its caloric usage. So that's why we have a minimum to the range that we want to use, is we want to be able to push for fat loss. We do want to have a deficit, but we don't want too much of a deficit. And then we have a top end of the range because if we eat too high, we're not actually in a deficit and we're not promoting fat loss at all. So for this client, I wanted them to narrow down their previous habits. Their old habits, they might have eaten one day at 1,500 calories. The next day they were at 3,500. It was all over the place. So we wanted to normalize their calories a little bit. We have some other goals, meeting a protein minimum and some distribution concerns, so that way they can manage their daily hunger and energy and mood. But if we look at calories alone, what we have is we have a range that I want them to be within every day. It's going to ensure they're in some degree of deficit that is productive, but not such a deficit that it's actually long-term counterproductive. And that would be their goal. Now, they have been struggling previously to be within that range. They then said, oh man, I'm not really losing weight. I've actually gained a little bit of weight. And they said, but I've been in the calorie range for the last 21 days. And I'm like, no, you haven't. So like I look at your journal and I look at your food every week, so it's like, no. So I went back through and I counted them up, and even in just the previous 14 days, they were outside of the range 9 out of 14 days. So when we discussed it a little bit further, they actually were referencing their calorie average. They were referencing that the average intake was within the range. Now, they knew that they were supposed to have their daily intake within the range. They know that. They read that multiple times. We talked about it multiple times, but they're soothing themselves by saying that, well, even though I didn't follow those directions, it still should have worked because my average was within that range. So that's what I want to talk about in today's podcast, is why that doesn't work. Clearly, because the scale didn't go down, clearly it doesn't work, so I want to talk about why. And it relates in part to what I already mentioned about the BMR, is if we have too large of a range, for example, one day having 1,500 calories, the next day having 3,500 calories, but we're supposed to be within a 2,000 to 2,800 range, why doesn't it work if the long-term average is still within that range? What happens is when we're on the days that we're over, we're clearly not going to lose fat because we're either at maintenance calories or we've exceeded maintenance calories. So there's no promotion to burn off body fat to actually be using that for fuel. So it makes sense that if we go over the range, then we're missing the benefit on that day. If we are actually above maintenance, we're actually going to impact the following day as well. Let's say, for example, their maintenance calories were 3,000. If they ate 3,000 calories, and it was a normal day, normal activity, and their maintenance calories for literally that day actually was exactly 3,000. It does change every day depending on a lot of different factors. But let's say they accidentally matched perfectly to the maintenance calories for that day. Well, then they just lost benefit if we look at a per 24-hour cycle. So if we're looking at the day as a single unit, then they lost the benefit of fat loss for that day. The very next day, if they go back down into the proper deficit, they're going to start losing fat again. However, if they overshot their maintenance calories, especially if they've been previously in a deficit, their body's going to say, oh, holy crap, here's this extra food, here are these extra calories. I could allocate those to different processes, of the body. However, I've been struggling not getting enough of what I really wanted, so I'm going to save this. This would be something where maybe you got a bonus in your paycheck, and every month you've been scraping by, barely making the bills, and all of a sudden you get an extra $500. I'm assuming the smart thing that we all could agree on is that we would probably save that $500. If we've just been scraping by, barely paying our bills, it would probably be better for us to save the $500, make a little bit of a cushion so that way we're not so stressed the following month. Now, not everybody's going to make a smart choice like that. Thankfully, our body is very smart with how it allocates its calories. It's a good banker, so it will bank those calories as body fat. That then means that not only did we lose the benefit of burning off body fat on the day we had the extra, we now have to burn off that extra that we stored before we can start netting progress again. So say, for example, we ended up storing 500 calories. We have to burn 500 calories off in a deficit the following day or two before we can even get back to making progress to where we were the day before the day we messed up. So it makes sense that if I overeat my calories, I lose that day. If I overeat them too much, I'm going to lose part of the next day and even the next day as well. Now, undereating has a negative consequence as well. If I too severely eat underneath my BMR, the body freaks out and it starts to say, okay, this is extreme. I gave up body fat, but I had to give up more than I was willing to and kind of ready to. And the body senses that the more it gives up, the more at risk it is. Body fat is saved energy to run our organs when we didn't have enough food coming in. Our body's ability to create body fat is kind of an adaptation process that helped us stay alive. So when we had feast or famine type of eating, when we had the feast, our body knew, okay, well, let me save some of this extra for the famine part when I've not had enough before. So it would save extra calories as body fat, and then that is what the body would use to run organs and do all the things that keeps us alive when we weren't eating enough. So if we create this sensation of too severe of a deficit, the body then is triggered to, number one, slow down the release of body fat, fight against that process, which would be reducing its caloric usage, which we could term as reducing its metabolism. The other thing is it is now in an increased sensitive state to store as much as it can. This is twofold problem. Number one, it's going to slow down how much we burn off, and at any moment it gets any degree of excess, even a momentary excess at a big meal, it'll save that as body fat. Now, when we do this too chronically, too often, what starts to happen is one of the ways in which the body downregulates caloric usage is it stops repairing muscle tissue, and it lets muscle tissue be burned off and kind of broken down, and it doesn't kind of replace it. It doesn't fight to keep it. Therefore, our amount of muscle decreases over time, and muscle burns calories, so our caloric usage per day will go down over time. That's what the body wants. The downside of that is maybe our maintenance calories before were 3,000. The body is starting to be too severely in a deficit, so it allocates less calories to hair, skin, nails, other non-essential processes. It lets muscle tissue be broken down and not replaced. So over time, all of a sudden, what our maintenance calories might have been 3,000 is now 2,900, then 2,800, then 2,700. So before, when that window used to be 2,000 to 2,800, all of a sudden 2,800 doesn't create that deficit that we used to have. And now 2,800 is actually close to what the body may have momentary excesses to start to save the body fat. And it now has an increased urge to do so. So when we undereat, we actually reduce the body's desire to burn calories, and we increase its desire to store calories, which would be creating body fat. This is why caloric average isn't, I would argue to say that it's actually not even worth tracking, because without context, without knowing the highs and the lows, you have no clue if you've been too low or too high if you're only looking at an average. I don't have any clients that I ever ask them to look at a calorie average. And this is why whenever that client who was struggling to lose weight said, well, my average has been this, I'm like, well, I know I didn't tell you to do that because I've never asked anyone to do that. We always have a range. And that would be why caloric consistency is so important. We want to be within an appropriate deficit if our goal is fat loss. We want to be within an appropriate deficit, enough of a deficit that actually promotes fat loss, but not so much of a deficit that it hinders the process of fat loss and actually prompts our body to store more. So therefore, it's really, really, really important for us to understand that controlling our consistency is extremely important, and it's actually what our target should be, not our average intake. It is emotionally and mentally easier to do extremes. To have one day where you eat nothing, one day where you eat everything, and yo-yo back and forth in between. That's what people do all the time. That's easy. But that's also why the majority of people struggle to lose weight, because it doesn't work. Instead, what we need to do is to create some consistency, create some structure. We need to have a day-to-day intentionality to what we eat, making sure that it's low enough, but not too low, and then doing that every day, all day, to the end of time, or until we reach our goal. So I wanted to cover that in today's podcast. Hopefully the client and I kind of hash that out in their personal journal. Hopefully they're on board right now. I do understand that their desire to use an average was a desire to protect themselves emotionally and mentally from the truth that what they're doing currently isn't good enough. They're have to do better. They're gonna have to put in more effort. And that is a crappy realization. It's something we often fight against and say, oh dang, I don't want to have to do more. I'm already doing a lot. I'm already stressed in these other areas of life. Why can't this be enough? Unfortunately, it isn't. If we have two extremes, two highs, two lows, even if the average is within our calorie range, it's not enough. We do need to have more precision to what we do. And today's podcast would help explain why. One of the ways you can set this up, if you'd like, is you can go to calculator.net. They have a BMR calculator. You can plug in your personal information, and it will tell you what your BMR is, and then it'll give you your maintenance calories based on whether you have a sedentary lifestyle, semi-active, or a super active lifestyle, and they have some parameters there, so you can decide where you fit. And your calories should be somewhere between BMR and maintenance calories if you want to lose weight. The lower in that range you go, the faster you'll lose fat. However, if you have a struggling day or an active day or you're super hungry one day, eat a little higher in the range. As long as you're under your maintenance, you're still going to lose fat. It's okay to cycle and fluctuate within the range. We just don't want to be outside of that range. And then if you have any more specific questions or if you want some guidance, of course, I would be happy to help you. That's what we do. You can go to our website at www.c3method.com. The 3 is spelled out T-H-R-E-E, so it's C-T-H-R-E-E method.com. You can reach out to me there. We'll set up a consultation, discuss your goals, what you're currently doing, and I can kind of help you set up some parameters, and we can figure out how to fit it into your lifestyle given your current demands and stresses and all the things you have going on. But hopefully today's podcast helped. Hopefully it highlighted the importance of consistency rather than an average when it comes to calorie control. Awesome. Well, if you found the podcast helpful, make sure you share it. The more people we share it with, the more people it can help. You can also find more information from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube. Both those places is under the name C3 Method. And as always, you can reach out on the website, c3method.com. Okay, that's everything. So I appreciate you listening. I hope this was helpful, and thank you very much.